harshly analytical, as if, you know, African Americans were a commodity, a light-skinned one worth more than a dark-skinned one.
It was a very abrasive kind of way of being pundit-like.
But he didn't say it in a way that he meant to be abrasive. It seemed to me the way the authors described it.
The way I read it is that he was trying to give reasons that he felt. I think he used some very bad terms, but I think the reasons he felt that Mr. Obama would be palpable to a lot of Americans. Reasons that I've heard a lot of commentators say. I've heard people right on this show say, well, Obama can win because he's not an Al Sharpton. This was a more abrasive way of saying that.
I would never say that.
Of course you did.
Yes,
but our next guest would.
I would have preferred Al Sharpton. I'm surprised he had time to talk to you at all, since I thought he would be busy writing his concession speech for next November. But I do want to know, did he ask you to stop using that Negro dialect when you talk to him?
See, now she can say that.
Oh, why?
And that's supposed to be
But you
cute,
said it's fine for him to say it.
No, I didn't. I said I was offended by it. But to act
come on. You cannot keep giving these Democrats a pass. You give them all a pass. They attack Patterson. They attack Rangel. Now they're attacking Harold Ford. You know you would not put up with this for 5 seconds of a Republican. And yes, it is outrageous to compare it to what, what's his name, Trent Lott.
Oh, so you do agree there's no comparison?
Yeah, because Trent Lott was just saying some dumb cheer at a birthday party.
Said that it would have been a better place if this guy had won.
He's cheering a 100-year-old man, toasting him at his birthday party. A 100-year-old man that he talked about, if he had won in 48, it would have been a better place, which would have left us in the back of the bus. He did not say that. He said he was running for president. It would have been a great country. Happy birthday.
May I intercede, you two? But isn't it a fact, though, Reverend Al, that Democrats do get a lot more slack than Republicans when it comes to racially insensitive or inappropriate
If Democrats say things that are not, I mean, you can't compare saying you wish a segregationist
that's different.
had won.
That's a different point.
But then tell me what's slack.
Well, look, but
we went after Trent Lott. Who else did we go after?
You went after Mitt Romney for being a Mormon, I might add, and for the racism of the Mormon Church.
Went out to,
and Senator Reid is a Mormon.
Add, Senator Reid is a Mormon, and I went out and met with the Mormon Church about that.
No, you can't keep doing this.
Absolutely.
You guys are just like the feminists, using the charge of racism against your ideological enemies.
Other than Mr. Trent Lott, who you admitted said some outrageous.
No, I did not. I said he made some silly toast.
Who did we go after?
It was outrageous.
And by the way, he did resign.
Who did we go after?
There's no one to go after because Republicans would never say anything that like Biden did. How did Reid not end up being vice president, by the way? At least didn't call
Well, then how do you say that we give them more slack when you can't tell us who we didn't, who did we go after in the Republican Party?
You haven't gone after Reid, you haven't gone after Biden, you haven't gone after...
Republican did we go after?
Well, because Republicans don't say things like that. But you go around and Reid himself
attacks
just
say that we wish the Dixiecrats had been the president.
Like slavery?
We just wish the Dixiecrat would have been the president.
Do you think Reid?
No, he just said Strom Thurmond, who was
because it would happen to be his 100th birthday.
Reverend, do you think Reid can recover, and will he generate enthusiastic minority support in the November election in Nevada?
I think every time there's an overreach like what the Republicans did today, it will have a tremendous backlash on them. A lot of people, including me, was very concerned about what Reid said until you tried to compare it to what Trent Lott said. Then we're saying, now, wait a minute. One, you're not only belittling us, you're acting like we're stupid. That's an insult to our intelligence to act like that's the same thing. This man was supporting an African-American being president and saying why he would be more palpable to some other people.
And the November senatorial election in Nevada, your prediction?
I think, despite
Reid trails in the polls.
Senator Reid apologizing to all African Americans, light-skinned, medium-skinned, dark-skinned, I still think he will lose.
I want to thank both of you for that very provocative. You want to button that up? Nothing has changed.
Yes.
Reverend Al Sharpton and Coulter, thank you. 1809.
Joining us now from West Palm Beach, Florida, Ann Coulter, the syndicated columnist, conservative commentator, #1 New York Times best-selling author. Her newest book is Guilty, Liberal Victims and Their Assault on America. And in New York, Reverend Al Sharpton, president and founder of the National Action Network, noted civil rights leader, and a syndicated radio host. All right, the statement was issued today from the White House concerning the meeting that took place earlier between the sergeant the president, and the professor. I am thankful to Professor Gates and Sergeant Crowley for joining me at the White House this evening for a friendly, thoughtful conversation. Even before we sat down for the beer, I learned that the two gentlemen spent some time together listening to one another, which is a testament to them. I've always believed that what brings us together is stronger than what pulls us apart. I'm confident that what has happened here tonight, and I'm hopeful that all of us are able to draw this positive lesson from this episode. Ann Coulter, do you think that will put it away?
I don't think it should. And also, by the way, I do think there was a little racial profiling with the president assuming the Irish cop would like to drink beer. No Chablis here. That's a little stereotyping. But no, I mean, I think it is a teachable moment. But the teachable moment needs to go to Barack Obama and to Henry Louis Gates. We have one case after another of these where there is an assumption of racial profiling or racism by cops or by teachers, and you have one hoax after another, from Tawana Brawley to the Duke lacrosse case. I mean, if we're going to claim that there is this rash of racial profiling in America, you know, eventually there's got to be one real case of it.
All right, Al, how do you counter?
Well, first of all, I think that you must deal with the fact that what the president did tonight was absolutely the right thing to do, to set a tone and a climate so we can go forward and deal with both what police are dealing with in terms of trying to fight crime and their fears, and what people have to deal with documented cases of racial profiling. There are 23 states that have laws on racial profiling. There have been any number of states that have studied and documented it. To say that they are all hoaxes is Ann, you know, being Ann. I think the fact is that when you see almost half the country dealing with this as state law, even the Justice Department under President Bush documenting the differences in terms of arrest and in terms of stops and searches, I think now we have a climate to deal with it.
And the question is, was this racial profiling? And the other night on this show, Colin Powell said, looking at both sides, he said that the professor was wrong for getting angry. It's a cop. You listen to the cop. The cop was wrong for arresting them. Are you saying, Ann, that there is no racial profiling? Are you saying that doesn't exist?
I'm saying that probably everything under the sun exists at one point or another, whether this is a crisis or an epidemic.
No, that's not the question. Does racial profiling exist?
But no, I do not think that there is an epidemic of racial profiling. I think there is an epidemic of claims of racism that turn out to be a hoax. I mean, like I say, you go back to Tawana Brawley. There was also the case of the Exeter kid, Edmund Perry, I think his name was.
But because those were hoaxes, are you saying that therefore there is no racial profiling because they may not have been racial profiling?
Well, all of the big cases that were released to us, and Bill Clinton citing a racial incident that was known to be a fraud in his Democratic acceptance speech at the Democratic National Convention in 1992. There was the Kiko Garcia case in New York, allegedly racial profiling, shot a kid. It turns out he's holding a machete. He was turning.
But do you think? I think the question. Before I come back to Al, Ann, do you think it's possible that a black man in America last night might have been stopped by someone, by a policeman, just because he was black?
I think it's possible that a man bit a dog yesterday. But if I keep hearing about man-biting dog stories, I want to see one real one. What we have is dog-bite-man stories, and we're told every time the man-bites-dog story turns out to be false, what you hear is, well, okay, this one wasn't true,
Sergeant
but
Crowley,
there are all the other ones.
Hold it. Sergeant Crowley spoke to the media after he had the beer with the president and the professor. Here's a little of what he said, and then we'll have Al comment.
What you had today was two gentlemen agree to disagree on a particular issue. I don't think that we spent too much time dwelling on the past. We spent a lot of time discussing the future.
What did you make of that, Al? Good idea?
I think that is a good idea, particularly of now, those in law enforcement and those that are involved in fighting for these cases can come together and sit with those in government and try, in this climate of trying to deal with what is fair and equal for all, do that. I mean, I remember when Janet Reno had began that, I would hope that Eric Holder and others picked that up. And I think that the fact of the matter is there are clear cases that have to be dealt with. I mean, you can go from Rodney King to Admiral Louima on and on, where people went to jail. I'm not going to get into this argument with Ann. Clearly, 23 states are not hallucinating racial profiling. And Colin Powell sat on this show the other night talking about his own experiences going to account. So all of these people are not making this up. To go 23 years ago to Brawley, I mean, try to find something this century, and we're talking about a problem that the Duke lacrosse case was not about profiling. That was about a report. You maybe need to find out what profiling is.
Claim of racism,
but racial profiling is when there is an assumption made based on race, when there is no one that had called in a report. And I think maybe if you understood the definition, you could not deny it.
Although, do you think it's possible that do you think Colin was right when he said the professor overreacted?
The question becomes, that's why you need to have law enforcement and all of these forces sit. The question is, what is overreaction in your own home? We need to define that. Is it possible? Sure. What we need to do now is deal with law. If you're in your house, someone comes to your door, you think it's the repairman, it is not, they order you out of the house, however you respond, is that overreaction? The fact of the matter is, what we do know is the prosecutor said, we're not going forward with this case. It's interesting to me, the police unions, Larry, were mad at the president. They never questioned the prosecutor's decision, saying, we are not going forward, which meant what undermined the arrest was not the president, not those that supported Dr. Gates like me, but when the prosecutor stopped the case.
And on the other hand, forget, if it's your house, and forget racial, it's your house, they're questioning you about your own house, would you be ticked?
In fact, I have been, at least in the initial crankiness by Professor Gates, I've been somewhat of a defender of his, in as much as I am someone who travels a lot, and I get cranky too, especially after a long trip from China. What it can't be defended, I think, is the next 48 hours, the next week, when he could calm down and think, oh boy, I overreacted, wish I hadn't done that. But I think that is a problem. Both aggrieved minorities and aggrieved females are told to take every slight, interpret everything as, oh, it's because you're black, it's because you're a woman. And I don't think that's good for blacks or females, and I don't think it's good for the rest of the country. And there's just one thing I'd like to say about the studies on racial profiling, and even the Bush administration coming up with them. The Bush administration itself suppressed a study that disproved 8 billion racial profiling studies about the New Jersey state troopers. There was a scientific study setting up cameras of people speeding. It turns out New Jersey state troopers, by scientific evidence that was their Bush administration kept rejecting, were stopping, if anything, not enough blacks.
So you're saying
I gotta get a break, guys. Hold it. I'll come right back. Hold it. I'll come right back with you. I have a statement just released by Professor Gates. He says, having spent my academic career trying to bridge differences and promote understanding among Americans, I can report that it's far more comfortable being the commentator than being commented upon. At this point, I'm hopeful that we can all move on and that this experience will prove an occasion for education, not recrimination. And I know that Sergeant Crowley shares this goal. You agree with that, Ann?
Yes, though I don't want to move on quite so fast. I mean, one other point that I mentioned in my column this week up on my webpage is, what if Sergeant Crowley had not been the model policeman who taught diversity classes, who had given mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to a famous black athlete? What if at some point in his career or in his life he had been accused, falsely or not, of racism? His life would be ruined right now, when we know this wasn't a case of racism. We know that now, but it's only because he's the model policeman that the case fell apart, and all of the usual race mongers are saying, let's move on, let's move on. I don't want to move on so fast as long as they brought it up.
Al, do you resent that statement?
No, because Ann is Ann. I think that the fact is the only case that fell apart was the case against Dr. Gates. Dr. Gates was the one arrested and charged. That's the case that fell apart. I don't know what case she's talking about against the officer. That's one. Secondly, I think many of us said on my webpage, nationalactionnetwork.net, that if this is a question of police overstepping their bounds and arresting him because there was no crime or racial profiling, we wanted an investigation. There's no race mongering to ask for an investigation on why a man was arrested in his own house when there was apparently no crime. But I think what the president has done, and I think it is important that we don't blow past this, is to get the disagreeable parties to say, we can disagree. No one backed down from what I saw tonight. We can disagree without being disagreeable. He got that. He has the union sitting with Walmart on that with health care. He had Newt Gingrich and I sitting in his office talking about education together. The climate, Ann, in America is no longer to start arguing and screaming and say even the Bush administration is covering up. The climate is let's sit down and say we disagree. Now let's solve the problems even though we disagree. I hope you learn to do that, Ann.
Geraldine wants to know simply this. What's your solution to Afghanistan?
That's a great question. I mean, it was going rather well under Bush. The problem is Obama, throughout the campaign, the presidential campaign last year, in order to appeal to the liberal base, kept referring to Afghanistan as that was the good war. That was the important war, the war of necessity, as he called it, as opposed to little Iraq, which was just the war of choice. To the contrary, neither country attacked us on 9/11. It was Osama bin Laden, who was a nomad who just happened to end up in Afghanistan. The Taliban didn't want to attack the U.S. But Iraq was beautiful for regime change because, like Iran, I might add, you had basically pro-Western educated young populists with lunatic leaders, whereas in Afghanistan, it's not good for regime change. It's not good for U.S. air power, where we dominate the rest of the world. Iraq is. It was much better just taking Kabul, getting rid of the Taliban and having a presence there. By focusing on Afghanistan as the big war, I think Obama's gotten himself into
What's the solution,
quite
Anne?
a mess.
What's the solution was the question.
The solution is to invent a time machine, go back during the campaign, and stop referring to Afghanistan as the war of necessity.
Duncan L. is asking about the culture of victimhood that you talk about. Are you implying that groups such as women, blacks and gays unfairly portray themselves as victims?
It's slightly different from that. It's more that liberals use these groups as cat's paws to promote heinous policies that then go on to create real victims, like the culture of single motherhood that you mentioned in the introduction. One example I'll give you from last week when Obama was speaking at the memorial to the Fort Hood victims. There was a crazed jihadist Muslim who shot up, I don't know how well known this is in Europe, shot up an army base here in the U.S., killing 13 troops. Okay, then there's a memorial, and as Obama is eulogizing the victims, he mentioned one of the women soldiers and said she was a single mother, and she did this and that, and then the last sentence was, and she leaves behind a loving husband. So you realize she's not a single mother now. Single motherhood is being cited as if, you know, she graduated magna cum laude. She won the Medal of Honor. She was a single mother. It's a feather in your cap. And I think this encourages, I mean, sometimes it can't be helped, obviously, but also, obviously, the rate of single motherhood has gone up through the roof with it being glamorized in Hollywood movies and glossy magazines through government policies.
B agrees with much of what you say, he or she says, but says, do you think Condoleezza Rice will run for president in 2012, and which voters do you think she'd attract if she were to win?
That's a great question. You know, I give a lot of speeches, mostly on college campuses. I prefer a hostile audience, but sometimes to Republican groups. And her name comes up all the time. Republicans love Condi Rice. And my only caveat to that is having supported for president Pat Buchanan, Steve Forbes, Alan Keyes, Pete DuPont, he was governor, but governor of a very small state. I think before somebody runs for president, he or she should run for something else. Right. You know, United States Senate, governor.
All right. Vera West asks you, is it hard being a conservative, straight, white American woman these days?
No, I find it a lot of fun.
Right, Big Daddy, finally, and simply asks, why can't Anne devote her talent towards bringing people together rather than dividing them into armed camps? Isn't the country, your country, the United States of America, already divided enough, Anne?
I'm trying to bring them together under principles of small government, freedom, pro-life, and national defense. If they'd just join me, we'd all be together.